Jax's revenge domain. The conference room smelled like expensive coffee and unearned confidence. Hunter Walsh sat at the head of the table in his $200 Patagonia vest, spinning a pen he probably couldn't refill. He was 26 years old, had been our CTO for exactly 3 weeks, and kept referring to our mainframe as tech debt. The same mainframe that processed $1.2 billion a day and kept Atlantic Banking Corp from becoming a smoking crater. I'm Bryce Sullivan, 53 years old. I've been keeping the lights on at this place since before Hunter was learning his multiplication tables. Built the batch processing scripts in 1989, survived the dot-com crash, the 2008 meltdown, and 3 different CEOs who thought blockchain was the answer to everything. Navy trained me to think in systems and redundancies. Corporate America taught me that competence doesn't always win. Bryce, Hunter said, leaning back in his Herman Miller chair, we need to talk about velocity, about agility, about the legacy anchor dragging us down. He meant me. I was the anchor. I sat there, hands folded, looking at this kid who probably thought Kobol was a small African nation. His MBA from Wharton was framed behind his desk. Daddy's connections had landed him the CTO role after 2 years at a fintech startup that burned through $50 million in venture capital without shipping a single product. Go ahead, Hunter. Tell me about the anchor. Look, you're a legend, he said with that fake smile they teach at business school. The work you did building this infrastructure, historic. But we're pivoting. Cloud native, microservices, Kubernetes. We need builders, not maintainers. And frankly, your salary band, well, it's heavy. He slid a thick envelope across the table. I put together a transition package. Early retirement, emeritus status. You get to walk away a hero. I didn't touch the envelope. Hunter, do you know what runs on that IBM power system in the basement? Old code, he scoffed. Spaghetti code. That's why we're scrapping it. It's the clearinghouse interface, the swift wire verifications, the biometric security protocol that keeps federal regulators from turning this building into rubble. You know, the stuff that prevents us from becoming the next Wells Fargo scandal. He waved his hand like he was shooing a fly. We've got consultants for that. DevCore's sending their A-team Monday. They'll scrape the business logic, refactor everything into Python microservices, deploy on AWS by Q3. I almost laughed. DevCore, the same consultancy that had botched 3 major bank migrations in the past 2 years. He thought a bunch of 22-year-olds who learned coding from Stack Overflow could parse 30 years of RPG and JCL in a weekend. The beautiful, tragic arrogance of it all. So this is effective immediately? I asked. Immediately. Need your badge and laptop. Security will escort you out. Standard protocol, nothing personal. I stood up, my knees popping like dry wood, reached into my jacket and pulled out my ID badge, the chipped plastic card that had been my passport for 34 years, placed it on the table. Then I pulled out my RSA hardware token, the little device with the rotating 6-digit codes that changed every 30 seconds, set it next to the badge. That everything? Hunter asked, eyeing my briefcase like I might be stealing staplers. That's everything the company owns, I said. I didn't mention the other thing, the thing they couldn't take. The thing embedded in my fingerprints and retina scan, hard-coded into the deepest security layer of our core banking system. After that Chinese state-sponsored attack in 2016, when they tried to compromise our admin accounts and nearly succeeded, I'd built a biometric authorization layer that required my physical presence to authorize any changes to settlement logic. The board had wanted accountability, a human throat to choke if something went wrong, so I gave them mine. Made myself indispensable in the most literal sense possible. Hunter didn't know about it. Why would he? Reading documentation was probably against his agile principles. Good luck, Hunter, I said. You're going to need it. We make our own luck. He grinned, tapping his temple. Disrupt or die, right? Something like that. I walked out past the open workspace where junior developers sat on beanbags, wearing noise-canceling headphones, typing code that would probably crash the moment it encountered real-world data loads. Took the elevator down without looking back. Colton, the security guard, looked surprised to see me with a cardboard box. Old Navy guy like me, we recognized each other's bearing immediately when he started 5 years ago. Everything okay, Mr. Sullivan? Fine, Colton. Just upgrading my operating system. I walked out into the New York humidity. September air thick with exhaust and ambition. Got into my F-150, adjusted the mirror, and drove home to my workshop in Connecticut. I didn't cry. I didn't scream. I went home and turned a piece of cherry wood on my lathe, feeling the grain smooth under my hands. Real craftsmanship, unlike the digital house of cards I'd just been evicted from. Because I knew exactly how long it takes for a system to realize its heart's been ripped out. In my experience, about 48 hours. Maybe less, given Hunter's enthusiasm for breaking things. Saturday morning, I was in my workshop, hand-sanding a jewelry box I was making for my daughter Sarah. First weekend in 20 years, I hadn't checked server logs over black coffee. Usually my weekends were punctuated by alert pings, CPU spikes, memory leaks, the electronic heartbeat of a $1.2 billion operation. Today my phone sat silent on the workbench next to my wood stain samples. The workshop was my sanctuary. 40 years of accumulated tools hung on pegboard walls, chisels my father had given me, a hand plane I'd restored myself, measuring tools precise to thousandths of an inch. Same attention to detail I'd brought to coding, but here I could see the results, feel the grain respond to patient work. Around noon, the first text came through. Logan Martinez, a junior engineer I'd hired 2 years back. Good kid from Queens, actually knew what a memory leak was and how to fix it without rebooting the entire system. In the current hiring market, that made him practically a unicorn. Bryce, are you really gone? The consultants are here. They're calling themselves the Modernization Strike Team. I took a sip of black coffee. No sugar, no cream, the way Navy cooks had served it, and didn't reply. I could picture it perfectly. Conference room full of whiteboards covered in meaningless circles and arrows. Digital transformation and synergy written in red marker. They'd be talking about decoupling the monolith, treating my carefully architected system like toxic waste. They didn't understand that the monolith wasn't just a pile of legacy code, it was a load-bearing wall. Pull it out without proper supports, and the whole building comes down. By Sunday evening, the demolition had begun. Logan texted again. They're bypassing staging environment. Hunter says we need to move fast and break things. They gave themselves root access to dev partition. Running scripts I've never seen before. Root access without staging. The digital equivalent of performing heart surgery with a chainsaw while riding a unicycle. I closed my eyes and could see the system architecture in my head. Beautiful, complex web of interdependencies I'd spent decades perfecting. Touch the customer master file, it ripples through to loan processing. Update the loan module, it pings the general ledger. And if the ledger doesn't get the proper handshake back within 0.05 seconds, it triggers the fraud prevention lockdown. The fraud lockdown. That was my ace in the hole. 10 years ago, after the Chinese military hackers had nearly penetrated our admin accounts, the board had panicked. They wanted accountability, a warm body they could blame if things went sideways. So I'd given them exactly what they asked for, built a biometric authorization layer into the core settlement engine that required my physical presence to approve any changes to production systems. The logic was simple. To push updates to the settlement logic, the code that actually moves money between accounts, you needed two things. First, a cryptographic key from the security team, which they had. Second, a biometric scan verifying the senior architect's authorization, who was currently hand-sanding cherry wood in his garage in Connecticut. They hadn't hit that wall yet. Still playing in the shallow end, messing with user interfaces, changing button colors from corporate blue to disruptive teal. They thought they were swimming laps. They didn't realize they were paddling straight toward Niagara Falls. I went inside and grilled a ribeye, medium rare, salt and pepper, nothing fancy. One benefit of living alone since the divorce, nobody to tell me how to cook my steak. Lisa had always wanted it well done, killed any flavor the meat might have had. Monday morning arrived with the grim inevitability of a system crash. I woke up at 6 a.m. out of habit, showered, put on jeans and a flannel shirt, my new uniform. No more ties, no more dress shirts that needed dry cleaning. Sat down at my home computer with a fresh cup of coffee. I wasn't logging into the bank's VPN. That would have been illegal, probably grounds for a lawsuit. But I still had access to the public-facing status page, the one customers could check. All systems operational, it cheerfully proclaimed in green letters. Lies. I knew what was happening inside that climate-controlled server room. The consultants were probably high-fiving each other over their weekend wins. They'd refactored the login screen, changed the submit button to match their style guide. Look at us. We're agile. We're disrupting legacy thinking. But 3 floors down in the basement, behind locked doors that required both keycard and biometric access, the IBM power system was watching, monitoring every command that came down the pipeline, checking access control lists that hadn't changed in a decade, looking for authorization patterns that weren't there. The system was patient. It had been designed by someone who understood that patience was a virtue in banking. Unlike Hunter's consultants, it didn't rush to judgment. It logged everything, cross-referenced permissions, and waited for proper authorization before executing anything that could affect real money. That was the difference between Navy training and MBA theory. In the Navy, you learned that systems fail. Equipment breaks, people make mistakes, so you build redundancy into everything, assume the worst-case scenario, and plan accordingly. MBA programs taught you to move fast and break things, which worked fine when you were burning venture capital on a social media app. Less well when you were responsible for processing mortgage payments and Social Security deposits for 2 million customers. I poured another cup of coffee and waited. Logan would text again soon. He was too conscientious not to notice when the error log started lighting up like a Christmas tree. Too honest not to report what he was seeing. The kid reminded me of myself at that age. Technically competent, but still naive enough to think that competence mattered in corporate politics. He was about to learn the hardest lesson of his career. You can't patch human stupidity with better code. My phone buzzed, right on schedule. The cracks started showing Tuesday morning. Legacy systems don't usually explode all at once. They die by 1,000 cuts, each one bleeding a little more efficiency until the whole operation hemorrhages to death. It started with the audit logs. In banking, if you don't log a transaction properly, it legally didn't happen. And if it didn't happen but money still moved, that's not a software bug. That's a federal felony with mandatory minimum sentences. I was at Home Depot, comparing wood stains for Sarah's jewelry box, when Logan called. Not texted this time, an actual phone call. Bad sign. I let it ring 3 times. The instinct to fix, to troubleshoot, to dive into the problem was burned into my DNA after 34 years. But I looked at the neat rows of lumber, stacked precise and true, reliable materials for reliable work. Bryce, thank God you picked up. His voice was pitched higher than usual, tight with stress. Sounded like he was calling from a server closet. What's wrong, Logan? The transaction sequence IDs, they're jumping. We processed the morning batch and the numbers are skipping by thousands. The compliance dashboard looks like a slot machine, all red warnings. But Hunter told us to suppress the alerts. He told you to suppress compliance warnings? My voice went flat as hammered steel. Kid, that's like telling you to unplug the smoke detector because the beeping is annoying. He said it's just legacy noise. Said the new microservices architecture handles indexing differently, and the old mainframe is getting confused by the changes. Called the error reports Boomer Spaghetti code in this morning's stand-up. Boomer Spaghetti. I squeezed the wood sample in my hand until my knuckles went white. 34 years of careful architecture, defensive programming, and bulletproof error handling reduced to an ageist food metaphor. Logan, listen to me very carefully. Do not suppress those warnings. Print them out. Email copies to your personal account. Document that you were specifically ordered to ignore federal compliance alerts. You understand what I'm telling you? I think so. But Bryce, how do I fix the sequence jump? The consultants are saying we need to force a raindex on the live transaction database. They want to do what? I nearly dropped the phone. Raindexing a live database during business hours was digital suicide. It would lock every table, freeze every transaction. The bank would effectively stop breathing. Hunter approved. It. Said we need to move fast and break things. The raindex is scheduled for 2 p.m. Logan, do not let them touch that database. You hear me? If they raindex the live tables while customers are making transactions, they'll corrupt the data pointers. Turn $1.2 billion worth of customer records into digital confetti. But the system's slowing down. Tellers are reporting 15-second delays on basic account lookups. Customers are starting to complain. Let it slow down. Go to lunch, Logan. Take a very long lunch. Sometimes the best thing you can do is nothing at all. Can't you just give me the emergency override code? I know you have one. I did know it. A 16-character hexadecimal string I'd memorized in 1997. 4A7F9E C8B1D6F3A. It would bypass the table locks, force cancel any running Raindex operation, and restore system stability in about 30 seconds. I can't help you, Logan. I'm retired, remember? I'm that legacy anchor that was dragging everyone down. You don't want anchors slowing down your agile development process. I hung up and stood there in the lumber aisle, heart hammering like an impact driver. Everything in me screamed to fix it, to save the system I'd spent my life building. I'd missed birthdays, anniversaries, vacation days to keep those lights on. But if I bailed them out now, Hunter would claim his methodology had solved the crisis. He'd learned nothing except that his incompetence had consequences that other people would fix. Next week, he'd try something even more catastrophic. I bought the wood stain and drove home to wait for the inevitable. By Wednesday morning, the small fires had become a 3-alarm blaze. Social media was lighting up. At Atlantic Banking app showing my account balance as $0. Fix your system. At Atlantic Banking can't transfer rent money. Been pending for 6 hours. What's going on? At Atlantic Banking website crashes every time I try to log in. This is ridiculous. I sat on my deck with a cup of coffee scrolling through the complaints. The bank's social media team was working overtime posting identical responses. We apologize for any inconvenience. We are currently upgrading our systems to serve you better by locking you out of your own money. Then came the internal leak that changed everything. Someone, probably Logan, though he'd never admit it, posted a screenshot on Reddit's r/sysadmin forum. It showed the mainframe's resource monitor, CPU usage pinned at 97%, memory utilization climbing toward redline, disk I/O thrashing like a dying fish. The consultants had deployed a Python script that was querying the entire transaction history database for every single user login attempt. Instead of checking a simple authentication table, it was doing full table scans across 15 years of historical data. A denial of service attack being launched from inside the building. The stock price started sliding. Down $1.20 by lunch, another $0.85 by close. Not catastrophic yet, but enough to get the board's attention. But tomorrow was Thursday, end of quarter, settlement day. In banking, quarterly settlement isn't optional. It's not an agile sprint you can extend or a deadline you can negotiate. By 4 p.m. Eastern on the last business day of the quarter, every bank in the country must reconcile its books with the Federal Reserve. Billions in commercial wire transfers, international clearings, and interbank settlements must be processed, verified, and transmitted. Miss that deadline, and the penalties start at career ending and escalate rapidly to congressional hearing with your name on C-SPAN. Thursday morning, I was 20 miles offshore in my 23-foot Boston whaler, rod in the water, phone turned off and locked in the tackle box. Perfect September weather. Crisp air, light chop, stripers running heavy before the water cooled. At Atlantic Banking, I knew exactly what was happening, minute by minute. 8 a.m. Quarterly batch jobs kicked off automatically. The mainframe began its ritual of aggregating 90 days of transaction data, normally a 2-hour process that ran smooth as clockwork. With Hunter's performance optimizations, it was probably choking on its own exhaust. 10 a.m., first warning bells, hash verification failures cascading through the system. The consultants had changed text encoding from EBCDIC to UTF-8 without updating the checksum algorithms. Classic rookie mistake. 11 a.m., full panic mode. Settlement window opened, but the system was locked in an endless verification loop, unable to release the wire transfers that kept America's banking infrastructure running. 11:15 a.m. I was reeling in a nice 28-inch striper when my phone started vibrating like an angry hornet in the tackle box. By the time I pulled it out, I had 47 missed calls, 15 voicemails, and 94 text messages. The desperation was almost musical in its escalation. Hunter 12:05. Bryce, pick up the phone. Hunter 12:08. Emergency situation, need your help. Hunter 12:15. Where's the override password? Hunter 12:20. I'm serious. Pick up now. But the one that made me smile was from Logan. Bryce, it's the biometrics. System is asking for senior architect authorization. Hunter tried to pseudo around it. The mainframe just locked him out completely. Error code BF401. Unauthorized access attempt detected. Initiating Fortress protocol. There it was. The beautiful, inevitable moment when 34 years of defensive programming kicked in. The Fortress Protocol wasn't just an access denial, it was a declaration of war. When the system detected someone trying to bypass the biometric lockdown, it assumed the worst, hostile takeover attempt. Every external connection severed, all non-essential processes terminated, critical files encrypted with rotating keys, and a countdown timer, 4 hours to provide valid biometric authorization, or the system would assume total compromise and wipe its own encryption keys. Recovery would require physical tape restoration from our disaster backup facility in Colorado, a process that took 72 hours minimum. Atlantic Banking would be effectively dead for 3 days. In modern banking, that was a corporate death sentence. My phone rang. Garrett Reynolds, chairman of the board, old-school banker who'd started as a teller in 1975 and worked his way up through every department. He understood that banking was built on trust, and trust was built on reliability. Bryce. His voice was shaking, not with anger, but with pure terror. Where are you right now? Fishing, Garrett. Just caught a nice striper. Beautiful day on the water. The system is asking for your thumbprint. Hunter says we can't process a single wire transfer without your personal authorization. Oh, that old thing. Fraud prevention protocol I implemented after the Chinese hack. It's all documented in Section 4002 of the Disaster Recovery Manual. You signed off on it personally. Silence. Then, Bryce, we have 90 minutes before the Federal Reserve closes its settlement window. If we miss that deadline, we are legally insolvent. The FDIC will seize our assets Monday morning. That does sound serious. Name your price, whatever you want. Just get to the office. I looked at my watch, 1:30 p.m. The marina was 45 minutes away, then another 30 minutes to downtown Manhattan. Cutting it close, but doable. I want a meeting, Garrett. Full board of directors plus Hunter. Conference room 4018. 1 hour. Anything. Just move. And Garrett, have security print me a visitor badge. I don't work there anymore, remember? The drive from Stamford took exactly 47 minutes. I didn't speed, didn't run lights, put on some Springsteen and let the world burn at its own pace. When you hold all the cards, you don't have to rush. Atlantic Banking's lobby looked like a disaster movie set. Employees clustered around phones, speaking in hushed, urgent tones. Customers lined up at teller windows that couldn't process their transactions. The electronic ticker board was frozen, still showing yesterday's closing prices. Mr. Sullivan, Colton practically sprinted to the security desk. Thank God you're here. They've been calling down every 5 minutes. Visitor badge, Colton. Protocol is protocol. The elevator ride to the 40th floor felt like ascending to my own coronation. With each floor, my leverage multiplied exponentially. By the time those doors opened, I was probably the most valuable consultant on the East Coast. The boardroom was a masterpiece of corporate despair. 10 directors slumped around the mahogany table like survivors of a particularly brutal merger. Laptops displayed cascading red warnings. Coffee cups and half-eaten sandwiches scattered across financial reports that were rapidly becoming worthless. Hunter stood by the floor-to-ceiling windows, staring out at the city his incompetence was about to bankrupt. His Patagonia vest hung open, expensive haircut disheveled. When he turned around, I saw something I'd never seen before in his eyes. Genuine fear. Bryce, Garrett said, standing. Thank you for coming. I didn't sit down. Remained standing at the foot of the table, briefcase in hand, visitor badge prominently displayed. Heard you had a technical issue. It's the biometric authorization, Hunter said, his voice cracking. We tried everything. Backup restoration, manual overrides, even called IBM support. But the system won't accept any commands without your physical presence. That's because it's working exactly as designed, I said calmly. You can't restore from backup during Fortress mode. The system encrypts its own file headers as a security measure. As for manual overrides, there aren't any. That was the whole point. I turned to Garrett. You have approximately 75 minutes before the Fed window closes. After that, Atlantic Banking becomes a very expensive paperweight. So fix it, a board member barked from the back of the room. I can fix it, I said. Takes about 30 seconds. Thumb scan, retina verification, system recognizes the senior architect, Fortress mode. Disengages, settlement processing resumes. Your backlog will clear in about 15 minutes. Then do it, 3 voices said simultaneously. I smiled. I can't. The silence was absolute. Because, I continued, the system requires biometric authorization from an active employee with level 5 security clearance. I am not an employee. You terminated me. If I attempt to scan my credentials as a civilian, the system will interpret it as an attempted breach and immediately wipe the encryption keys. It was a beautiful lie. The mainframe didn't check employment status. Couldn't, since it didn't interface with HR systems. But they didn't know that, and I wasn't about to educate them. "We'll hire you back," Garrett said immediately. "Full reinstatement, original salary." I reached into my briefcase and withdrew a document I'd prepared that morning. I've drafted a consulting agreement, slid it across the table where it came to rest in front of Garrett like a legal grenade. "The rate," he whispered, adjusting his reading glasses. $450 per hour, 40-hour weekly minimum, plus quarterly retention bonuses. "Do the math, Garrett. It's considerably less than the $500 million in federal penalties you'll face for missing settlement." He kept reading, his face growing paler with each clause. "What does it say?" Hunter demanded. Garrett cleared his throat. "The consultant reports directly to the board of directors. The chief technology officer position will be restructured to report to the consultant for all matters involving core banking infrastructure." Hunter's jaw dropped. "You want me to report to you?" "No, Hunter. I never want to speak to you again. You can keep playing with your app interfaces and user experience designs, but the adults will handle anything that actually moves money." Silence stretched until Garrett spoke. "Clock's ticking, Bryce." He signed. I folded the contract, slipped it into my briefcase, and walked over to Hunter's abandoned laptop. The keyboard was still sticky. Some things never change. "Give me room to work," I said. The boardroom cleared except for Garrett, who stood behind me like a nervous father watching his kid take a driving test. I opened the terminal and typed the familiar IP address. Green text on black background, the same interface I'd stared at for 34 years. "Critical security lockdown, senior architect, biometric verification required user, B. Sullivan, timeout, 004732. I pressed my thumb to the laptop's fingerprint scanner, then leaned forward for the retina scan. 2 soft beeps. Identity verified, fortress mode disengaged, resuming settlement processing. The room erupted in nervous laughter and scattered applause. On the wall display, I watched the queue drain like water through a broken dam. Thousands of pending transactions flowing through the system, each one representing someone's mortgage payment, paycheck, or retirement fund. "Settlement will complete in 12 minutes, I announced. "You'll hit the Fed window with time to spare." Garrett's shoulders sagged with relief. "Thank you, Bryce. I don't know how to thank me by not letting it happen again." I closed the laptop and stood up. "I'll be in Monday to start cleaning up this mess." I walked past Hunter, who looked like he was about to be sick. "Don't worry," I said quietly. "UI design is important work. Somebody has to make the buttons pretty." 3 months later, Atlantic Banking was boring again. Boring meant stable. Stable meant profitable. The stock price had not only recovered but hit a 5-year high after I published our new security white paper, Defensive Architecture in Critical Financial Systems. Other banks started calling, asking if I did consulting work. I only came into the office Tuesdays and Thursdays now. Rest of the time I worked from my shop, monitoring system logs on an encrypted tablet the bank had bought me. Military-grade security for a military-trained mind. Hunter had lasted exactly 6 weeks after the settlement crisis. Officially, he'd decided to pursue other opportunities in the startup ecosystem. Unofficially, the board had made it clear his services were no longer required. Last I heard, he'd joined a blockchain company in San Francisco. They went bankrupt 3 months later. Logan Martinez was thriving as my deputy. Kid had potential. Reminded me of myself 30 years ago, if I'd been Hispanic and better at explaining technical concepts to non-technical people. I was grooming him to eventually take over, though that was still years away. Some knowledge takes time to transfer properly. The consultants from DevCore had been quietly shown the door the Monday after the crisis. Their modernization efforts were rolled back systematically, like removing a cancerous tumor. The Python microservices were deleted. The cloud migration was canceled. We kept what worked and fixed what didn't. "Legacy systems aren't legacy until they stop working," became my new motto. I had it printed on coffee mugs, for the entire IT department. 6 months later, I was in my workshop on a Saturday morning, putting the finishing touches on a rocking chair for Sarah's new baby, my first grandchild, when my phone rang. Unknown number with a 312 area code, Chicago. Bryce Sullivan. Mr. Sullivan, this is Janet Brooks, CTO at Midwest Financial. I'm calling because we have a situation that sounds very familiar to what happened at Atlantic Banking. I smiled, setting down my sandpaper. Let me guess. New management, modernization initiative, and now your core systems are acting up? Our mainframe is in fortress mode. Our settlement deadline is Monday, and the only person who knew the override protocols just retired last month. I looked out my workshop window at the Connecticut countryside. October leaves were turning the color of money and rust. My consulting rate is $600 an hour now, I said. 2-day minimum engagement, and I'll need to speak directly with your board of directors, whatever it takes. I open my calendar app on my phone. I can be in Chicago Tuesday morning. But first, let me ask you something. How old is your new CTO, and does he own anything from Patagonia? Her laugh told me everything I needed to know. 1 year later, the call came while I was teaching Logan how to hand-cut dovetail joints in my workshop. Real craftsmanship, the kind that lasted generations, unlike the digital quick fixes that dominated his generation's thinking. Bryce, you need to see this. He held up his phone, showing a news article. Hunter Walsh, former banking executive, sentenced to 18 months for securities fraud. I read the article while Logan practiced his cuts. Hunter's blockchain startup had been a Ponzi scheme disguised as a cryptocurrency exchange. Investors lost $180 million before the SEC shut it down. The judge had been particularly harsh about Hunter's pattern of technological incompetence masquerading as innovation. Think he learned his lesson? Logan asked. I tested the fit of his joint, still a little loose but improving. Some people learn from their mistakes. Others just find new ways to make the same ones. My phone buzzed with a text from Garrett Reynolds. Board voted you a lifetime consulting contract. Whenever you're ready to fully retire, the offer stands. You've earned it. I looked around my workshop, tools my father had given me, projects for my grandchildren, the peaceful satisfaction of building things that lasted. Then I looked at Logan, eager to learn, hungry for knowledge that couldn't be Googled or crowdsourced. Maybe in a few years, I typed back. Still got some knowledge to transfer. I had learned something important in my 54th year. Real power isn't about having all the keys. It's about teaching the next generation which doors are worth opening and which ones should stay locked. The mainframe hummed quietly in its basement vault, processing $1.2 billion a day with rock-solid reliability. Boring, stable, and absolutely essential, just the way I'd built it. Some anchors keep ships safe, in harbor, others just drag them down. The difference is knowing when to drop anchor and when to pull it up and sail home.